Look at your hands. Look at the people walking past you on the street. You probably think your existence is completely normal. Ghost. That is what you actually are. You are the sole survivor of a massive, ancient family. For most of our history, we were not alone. If you traveled back 50,000 years, you would find a planet where several different kinds of humans existed at the exact same time. Some of them looked a lot like us. Others were built completely differently. Shorter, heavier, shaped by brutal climates and landscapes that would break a modern person. One species lived on a remote island and evolved to be barely 3 feet tall. Another is so mysterious that nearly everything we know about them comes from a single finger bone. And then there was us, Homo sapiens. Today, we are the only human species left, not because we were the strongest, or the smartest, or the ones who had been here the longest, survivors. We are just the ones who are still here, which raises a question that does not have a clean answer. What happened to everyone else? Complex. The truth is much slower and much more complicated. To understand how this played out, you have to start with the species that lasted the longest, Homo erectus. They showed up around 2 million years ago. To put that massive number in perspective, everything modern humans have ever accomplished, every city we have built, every language we have spoken, footnote, all of it fits inside the last few thousand years. Homo erectus was on this planet for a stretch of time so long that our entire history looks like a joke next to theirs. Their bodies were the first to look recognizably human. They had long legs and a frame designed perfectly for running over open ground. They were almost certainly the first human species to leave Africa, which means they figured out how to survive in environments they had never evolved for. They developed the famous Acheulean stone tools that barely changed over hundreds of thousands of years. That sounds like a severe lack of imagination, but it is actually the opposite. What they made worked so perfectly well that there was absolutely no pressure to improve on it. Left behind, but by their final chapter, the world had changed. In 1891, researchers in Trinil, Indonesia, uncovered their final traces. Their last populations ended up completely isolated on the island of Java. Cut off from the mainland, the forests they had always hunted in started shrinking. The animals they depended on became incredibly hard to find. Without enough people or enough space to recover, a species that had survived for close to 2 million years simply ran out of options. Extinct. After outlasting everything the planet had thrown at them, Homo erectus was gone. You have probably pictured a Neanderthal before. A grunting, hunched, club-swinging brute. Delete that image. It was invented, not discovered. The real Neanderthal was something far stranger and far more familiar than anything Hollywood ever gave you credit for. They were built for survival in ways that are hard to overstate. Their bodies were compact and powerful, with wide chests and thick bones. Their faces had large noses that warmed freezing cold air before it ever reached their lungs. Their brains were actually slightly larger than ours, averaging around 1,600 cubic centimeters. They hunted massive animals at point-blank range, which is why their skeletons show heavy injury patterns. Patterns that look exactly like modern rodeo riders. Discoveries in Shanidar Cave suggest they even buried their dead with flowers. They knew how to control fire, made sophisticated tools, and deeply cared for each other. They ruled across Europe and Western Asia for more than 300,000 years. But around 45,000 years ago, Homo sapiens began moving into their territory. For a few thousand years, both species actually lived side by side. DNA evidence proves they even had children together. Competition? But living alongside us created a new challenge for them. Both species relied on the exact same land and animals for survival. Homo sapiens lived in larger groups and had wide social networks. This allowed them to share resources, knowledge, and support over massive distances. However, Neanderthals generally lived in much smaller, heavily isolated groups. Making it much harder for them to recover from difficult times. At the same time, the climate kept violently shifting, making survival even harder. Their populations became smaller and their genetic diversity crashed. By around 40,000 years ago, they vanished from the Earth. They were not wiped out by a single dramatic event. Instead, competition, climate change, and shrinking numbers slowly pushed them into extinction. Now, Let us talk about the Denisovans. They were different from every other species on this list because we can barely see them. In 2008, a single tiny finger bone was pulled from Denisova cave in Siberia, a fragment so incredibly small it could easily sit in the palm of your hand. But when scientists extracted its DNA, the results were shocking. It did not match Neanderthals, it did not match Homo sapiens. It was something else entirely, a previously unknown branch of the human family that had been hiding all along. Since then, only a handful of additional remains have ever turned up. And yet, their genetic shadow is absolutely enormous. Their ancestry shows up in modern populations across parts of Asia and Oceania. Tibetans inherited a specific Denisovan gene called EPAS1, allowing them to function at extreme altitudes. Living shadows, a species we can barely find in the dirt, is still keeping modern humans alive in thin air. But as a living, breathing population, they faded out somewhere around 30,000 years ago. Imagine finding a species of humans so small, so strange, that half the scientific community refused to believe it was real. That is not a hypothetical. That is exactly what happened in a cave in Indonesia in 2003. Inside Lungbua Cave, researchers found a human species unlike anything seen before. They stood only about a meter tall and had brains roughly the size of a grapefruit. At first, many scientists were deeply skeptical. They argued these were just modern humans with a rare developmental disorder. But as more evidence was uncovered, the truth became clear. This tiny human lived on an island alongside giant Komodo dragons and dwarf elephants. Evolutionary biology calls this the island rule. Islands drive evolution in unusual directions, shrinking. When species are isolated for long periods, large animals become small, and small animals can grow strangely large. Homo floresiensis is one of the most remarkable examples of this biological process. But just like the others, when modern humans arrived in the region, the tiny humans vanished. We do not know exactly what happened, but on a small island, a small population simply runs out of time. So, why are we the only human species left? The obvious answer is intelligence. But that falls apart very quickly. Neanderthals were highly intelligent. Denisovans adapted to extremes. Erectus outlasted us by millions of years. The network, what actually separated us, was something entirely different. Consider this. Archaeologists have found seashell jewelry and obsidian tools hundreds of kilometers from where they were made. Ordinary people, moving ordinary objects across distances a single lifetime could never cover on foot. That is not decoration. That is a supply chain of ideas, tools, techniques, and crucial survival knowledge moved between communities rapidly. When one group faced a crisis, the things they had learned did not die with them, because that knowledge had already traveled somewhere else, into someone else's hands, long before the crisis hit. A Neanderthal band that lost its best hunters lost that knowledge forever. A Homo sapiens band that lost its best hunters could still send someone 3 valleys over and come back with the answer. But even that only explains part of it. Luck and geography played a massive role. We were not destined to be the last one standing. We just happened to be. The other species were not early versions of us, and they were not stepping stones. They were their own unique kinds of humans, surviving beautifully in a harsh, unforgiving world. For most of human history, we were just one tiny branch of a much larger, incredible family, alone. Now we are the only one. So the next time you feel completely alone in the world, just remember, you literally are. Your entire species is.